Good evening, everybody. Boy, is it good to be together. Welcome to First Parish Arlington, First Parish Unitarian Universalist of Arlington. My name is John Anderson, and I am a member of the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Climate Action Working Group. We are a group that's trying to keep connections and build connections between our faith community and the moral issue of dealing with the challenges before us that are global in scope and need action from local to regional to global. And we're trying to pay attention to the good professional work going on from many organizations to help shift the landscape of policy, the landscape of working together to change the systems that we know we need to change to maintain sustainability and vibrancy in our communities, both here locally and beyond. So I'm really pleased to have you all join us tonight. This is a really vibrant community. I invite you to look into what's going on beyond the Climate Action Working Group, with the Climate Action Working Group and others, and welcome to this space, to this program.
Hi, I'm Ann Goodwin. I also happen to be a member of First Parish's Climate Action Working Group and Mothers Out Front. And I'm happy to chat with you about either of those groups. But I am here tonight to sing a song for you, or with you, if you care to sing along. This song is called The Gentle Arms of Eden. It was written by Dave Carter. It tells the whole story of evolution and the fall of civilization in 4 verses. And it does have a wonderful chorus. If you catch on, please feel free to sing. On a sleepy, endless ocean, as the world lay in a dream, there was rhythm in the splash and roll, but not a voice to sing. Then the moon fell on the breakers, and the morning warmed the waves, and a single cell did jump and hum in joy, as if to say, this is my home, this is my only home. This is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. And should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Then the day grew bright and rounder, and the 1 turned into 2, and the 2 into 10,000 things, and old things into new. And on some virgin beachhead, a lonesome critter crawled, and he looked about and shouted out in his most astonished drawl, this is my home, this is my only home, this is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. And should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Then all the sky was buzzing, and the grass was carpet green, and the wary children of the woods went dancing in between. And the people sang rejoicing when the fields were glad with grain. This song song of celebration from their cities on the plain. This is my home. This is my only home. This is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. And should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Let's do that again right now. This is my home. This is my only home. This is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. And should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. This is my home. This is my only home. This is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. And should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Now there's smoke across the harbor, and there's factories on the shore, and the world is ill with greed and will and enterprise of war. But I will lay my burden in the cradle of your grace, in the shining beaches of your love and the sea of your embrace. This is my home. This is my only home. This is the only sacred ground that I have ever known. And should I stray in the dark night alone, rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Rock me, goddess, in the gentle arms of Eden. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Amy Coolidge, who is the chair of the Arlington Democratic Town Committee, who will introduce our guest.
Thank you, Anne. I get to go after the great singer and before the world-renowned author. But I'm very happy to be here. As Anne mentioned, I chair the Arlington Democratic Committee, and as I look out here, I see a whole bunch of faces that I don't know or recognize, which is a wonderful thing because it makes me think that all the people in this room are of like mind with the Arlington Democratic Committee. It's always good to see unfamiliar faces. That's part of our mantra. We are a group that's elected every 4 years. We're on the presidential ballot here in Arlington, and we are the leadership of the Democratic Party. It's a group, a hearty group of activists whose mission is to support the vision and the values of the Democratic Party and to get Democrats elected into office. And I think you're probably all here because you share with us the visions of climate change and healthcare and education, and that list goes on. And our group is very determined next year to make sure, and we're going to get it right this time, to change the occupant of the White House and get it blue again. And we would love for you to be part of our efforts, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to be a host for this event tonight. But before I do that, I think it's really important that you know the faces and the people of the Arlington Democratic Committee. So those of you in here that are a voting member or an associate member of the committee, could you stand up, please? This is your committee. It's not the whole committee, but it's part of the committee. And as I said, we probably have maybe around 60 people, 50 or 60 people. We meet once a month. We usually meet in the event room behind the common ground. Our meetings are open for all. They're posted on the on our website, arlingtondems.org, and our Facebook page. Yes, this is a commercial. But we really hope that you'll join us. And every single month that we meet, we have new people. So I hope you made note of who some of these people are. They're very friendly. We'd love to have you join us. As I mentioned and has been mentioned before, this event tonight is really a collaborative effort, and I want to thank First Parish for hosting us here. They're just always there for all the right things, so thank you so much and, for hosting us. Also on your programs, you'll see that there are a number of other organizations that are hosting that. And I want to make sure you get, if you didn't notice, we give them a shout out. Like to thank Mothers Out Front, Sustainable Arlington, Massachusetts Sierra Club, 350 Mass, plus 350 Metro North Mode, and the Elders Climate Action. So thank you to those groups for caring and putting your shoulder to these important issues. Also want to recognize some elected officials that are with us. I see Representative Sean Garbely in the back. Selectman Joe Curro is here as well. And I think that's it. I'll get in trouble if I missed anyone. Did I miss anyone? Who am I? Oh, Jennifer, who's from the school committee. Sorry, I didn't see you, Jennifer. And all these people that I'm recognizing and all these groups, they're all volunteers. They're all people that are doing something in this town to make it better. So thank you all. Also want to just stress again, if you didn't sign up, please sign up, because what we'd like to do is make you aware of our activities in the next year going forward. Our committee has put together what we call an issues committee. And in that committee, we have a very hardy group that has put together this event. In fact, when I came in, one of them had given me a 5-page run of show. That's how many details are involved to putting this together. So I really need to have these folks stand up and receive your recognition. Robin Bergman, Mary Cummings, Catherine Farrell, Bill Gardner, Peggy Gardner, Krista Kelleher, Paulette Schwartz, Wendy Seltzer, Alice Trexler, Jordan Weinstein, and Lynn Wolfsfeld. Can you all stand up? They're the ones that really put their shoulder to this. And this is, we've done some other forums. We did a voting forum a couple of months ago and plan to pursue this issue of climate action. So, please continue to pay some attention so we can let you know about these events as they come up. We are really thrilled and excited. When the Issues Committee came a couple of months ago to our committee meeting, they were just so thrilled to be able to let us know that we had a really good shot at getting our speaker, Frances Moore LePay, to join us tonight. So before I came, I thought, how do you introduce this woman? It would take a half an hour, truly. As if you go on to Wikipedia or any sites, she has got her up to her eyeballs in all these important issues. She's written books, 19 books. She's and I'm sure you all know Diet for a Small Planet. Probably got some of you in the room tonight. She's been a recipient of 18 honorary degrees. She's co-founder of the Small Planet Institute and 2 other national organizations. She publishes, she teaches, she serves on advisory boards and committees. She writes books. She speaks all over the place. And most importantly, continually she calls us to rethink our challenges in ways that empower us to action. So the most exciting part of this evening is about to begin, because I am going to stop talking and bring her up to talk to you. So thank you.
I want to, first of all, echo all of those many, many thank yous, particularly to Robin, but all of you who brought me here tonight. I also wanted to call out Richard Rowe, my beloved, who's here somewhere. Where are you, Dick? There you are. Because without this man, many of you know Richard Rowe, I wouldn't be in Boston. I fell in love with him, and the rest is history. And we live in Belmont. So I'm very, very, very happy to be here. I also have some Unitarian roots, which I will explain. I've titled my talk, The Work of Hope. And by that, I mean hope that is eyes wide open hope. It is not sheltering myself from anything. It is the taking it all in kind of hope. And you know, we've read, right, hope springs eternal, but I think we've also found you got to dig for that spring. Yes. And my feeling, though, in this is that, you know what? It is all worth it. Because at age 75, I've come to see that hope is power. Hope is not for wimps. Hope is power. And what I mean by that is over the decades, I've been energized. Can you hear me? Yes. Yes. If you can't, please wave wildly and I will. Okay, we need help with the mic. They're waving wildly in the back. Should I continue while you? Yes. Yes, okay. This hope is power led to one and followed from one realization, and that is that we now know that we live in a world of continuous change in which we're all connected. As a German friend of mine, a physicist, said, Frankie, in the world we know now that there are no parts, there are only participants. Well, in this world, with continuous change in which we're all connected, it is not possible to know what's possible. And that is the most freeing realization that has led very, very much of my life's work. It is not possible to know what's possible, and that is ultimately very freeing because we can go for the world we want. Now, I say that I want to share with you a little trick that was really helpful in this staying in possibility, is that I really keep a short list in my head of things that I would have given almost zero chance of ever happening until they did. For example, my Unitarian roots. Okay, my parents' Unitarian church in Fort Worth, Texas, almost collapsed under the witch hunt of the McCarthy era, right, in the early 50s. Jump forward a little more than a decade, and what am I doing? That same, still the US government, I am part of the war on poverty. My first job is actually paid for by the war on poverty, and I was going door knocking for the Welfare Rights Organization. And what are the chances that I could have predicted, or my parents could have predicted, could have gone from the horror of McCarthyism to my experience in which, you know, Reagan said the war on poverty, we lost. No. We cut the rate of poverty by at least 40% in a decade. So it's not possible to know what's possible is a very, very freeing premise of my life. Now, in this sense of possibility, I'm arguing that we do not have to settle for random acts of sanity or grasping at straws. No, we don't. That we can actually do the work of asking, you know, how did we get here? And seeing if we can find ways that our individual actions can actually touch the roots of how we got to the predicament that we're in today. So to sustain ourselves, I think we have to go that far. And so I'm going to ask you, how many of you, just your gut reaction, how many of you feel you have a working theory about how we got here into this mess? I figured you guys would be a high percentage answer to that. Okay, but I have the mic, right? So I get to tell you my theory. Afterwards, you can, during the Q&A, you can share yours. But here's my theory about how we got here. One, I'm going to argue that in the moment of global crisis that we're facing today, sometimes it actually has some value in the sense that my metaphor here feels very real to me. In the midst of a fierce, fierce storm, the biggest tree will fall, and we have to look at the roots. Go for the roots. So I'm going to share with you my sense of what are the biggest roots, the interacting crises that have brought us to today's situation. I believe that there are three interacting roots. What I call rigged democracy, very, very real for a lot of us. And then what I call brutal capitalism. Brutal, when I say one rule, I mean it is driven so much by a single rule of do what brings highest return to existing wealth. So wealth accrues to wealth to wealth that then leads to humiliation and to blaming. And they then also generate this climate catastrophe in the middle that we're in the middle of, which engenders fear and despair. So I believe that these are all, however, still symptoms. We've got to go even deeper than that. And so I've struggled a long time to share this with you, but the insight came very early in my life. I was gifted. I was really gifted when at 26, I was sitting in the UC Berkeley library thinking that if I could just understand why people are hungry in the world, that would unlock the mysteries of economics and politics. So I literally sat with my dad's slide rule and put two and two together kind of thing and realized, wait a minute, all the experts were telling us from their pedestals that we were running out of food. Famine was inevitable. There was a book came out that time, Famine 1975. This is the late 60s. And Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb Exploded. And yes, it had to be scarcity was causing our crisis. And yet I realized, oh no, they're wrong. There's more than enough food in the world for all of us. And so I came to see, this is the gift. I came to see that we humans are creatures of the mind. We see the world through culturally determined frames, not as it is, but as we are. And no one has said this better, of course, than Albert Einstein. It is theory which decides what we can observe. So I want to tell you a little family story. Dick and I host Thanksgiving for about 35 people. And a few years ago, I got up in the morning ready to go down in our kitchen and chop vegetables for everybody loves my root vegetable dish. And I couldn't find the Dutch oven anywhere. I looked in all the cupboards. I went to the basement. I got so frustrated. Oh, did somebody borrow it and not even tell me? I was really pissed off. But I started chopping my root vegetables. About 20 minutes later, I turn around, and there it is. But I put a plant in it. And I was looking for a Dutch oven, and I usually don't bake my plants. So I literally did not see it. I was just a few feet from it. And I laughed out loud because I said, Frankie, that's what you tell people. That you're blinded by the frame. And so I just had to share this red pot story that proves Albert Einstein right. It is theory. My theory was I was looking for a Dutch oven, not a planter. So, we hear often, seeing is believing. No. Believing is seeing. What are the core ideas that we hold? They determine what we can see, what we cannot see, therefore whether we are serving life, serving our own and others or not. And so here goes. If I'm right, we have to go deeply enough to see what is the causation story that our culture is telling us, because that will determine whether or not we can succeed in actually creating a life-supporting society. Now, I want to delve into this then. I believe that it helps to look at the dominant story being told in light of what has preceded it. So I just want to underscore this, that before the current period, I want to compare the stories before our current period today with the period that came before. In other words, from my birth years of the 40s to the 70s. And I think they're very useful to compare. Two framing stories here. Okay. From the 40s to the 70s, I believe that there was the dominant story that I received was that, yeah, government had its critics, but fundamentally that government could partner with citizens to promote the general welfare. Guess where the general welfare call to action it's in the preamble to our Constitution, that we must promote the general welfare. And this was a view that both Democrats, many, and Republicans also felt that that was a reasonable premise. And Dwight Eisenhower, after all, he passed the first civil rights legislation and even sent troops to help enforce desegregation. And Richard Nixon, for all his flaws, he created the EPA and the Clean Air Act, etc. But then, by the early 70s, those at the pinnacle of our economy got really scared. They began to promote a very, very different story. They promoted a story that government is the problem. You've heard that quote many times from Ronald Reagan. And the solution is a market fueled by individual self-interest because, well, that's all we can really count on. And so what happened then? They were really terrified. And the Chamber of Commerce in 1971 was so worried about the threat of what had been happening in the 60s, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, anti-war. They commissioned a corporate lawyer, by all accounts, a really nice guy, corporate lawyer, Lewis Powell, who's soon to be a Supreme Court justice, to write some instructions for how the business community was going to deal with this threatening turn of events that the free enterprise system was really in, quote, deep trouble and the hour is late. So they asked him to write a memo, commissioned it, and he did. It's 34 pages, and it really strikes you as it's filled with a lot of fear. Actually, he only singles out Ralph Nader by name. And all Ralph Nader had done by that time was save us from exploding cars, but he was really threatening in the eyes of Lewis Powell. But fundamentally, he called on the business community, which he saw as very not listened to at all, to put forth their worldview of the free market as the solution to our problem and government as a deterrent, to put forth that in every way possible to really promulgate that view. And so Adam Eichen and I, in our book, Daring Democracy, you don't have to read all those words, but it boiled down to this significant strategy on the part of very, very wealthy individuals. The Koch brothers, some of you must know that their father founded the John Birch Society over in Belmont. Yep. And so the Koch brothers, but also other families of great means, the Mercers, you've heard of the Mercers, right, with Cambridge Analytica, and the Mellon Shea family, the Bradley, the Coors, they really, really took to heart. This is sort of the essence of many of the things that Lewis Powell laid out, and very effectively developed these 8 strategies. And certainly think tanks were a big part of it, the Cato Institute. Only recently did I learn about the Heartland Institute. Many of you environmentalists here, you must know about Heartland. It's a right-wing think tank in Chicago that once actually had a billboard with pictures of Ted Kaczynski and Charles Manson and Fidel Castro, saying that anybody who believes in the climate science and the threat of climate change is equivalent to these guys. They didn't keep it up very long. But anyway, it was pretty extreme stuff. Yes, this has been extremely effective. And one of their strategies that they recommended is increased lobbying. And in just the 1 decade after the Powell memo, the number of companies that have lobbyists in Washington increased 14-fold. So it was taken to heart. Now, in all of this, the Koch brothers were particularly effective in creating what appears to be kind of a grassrootsy, spontaneous emergence of community-based groups with this worldview, but actually is very well funded, and Harvard scholars have determined that this network of grassroots, in quotes, groups is actually now funded by the Koch brothers, is now larger than the Republican Party itself and more resourced than the Republican Party. but pretty much invisible still. So in all this, I'm not blaming bad people. I'm underscoring that this worldview, I'm just pointing out that democracy is not a value in this worldview. So it is, however, powerful in its core assumptions. And I want to go back to my original insight at age 26, because what I see in this worldview is still the premise of scarcity, that there's not enough of anything, there's not enough of energy or water or you name it, parking places in Boston, you name it, not enough, and that therefore we have to figure out some way to sort out who's going to get what, because we're not all going to get what we want. No way. So how do you sort that out? Well, you can't trust humans to reason together and come up with fair rules. No, you need an automatic force, the market, to sort it out for us. And so that puts in place then what I've come to call, again, trying to define why we are here, is come to call this spiral of powerlessness that is self-reinforcing. Because if you start out with this premise of lack of goods and goodness, I want to underscore the goodness part, the lack of capacities to cooperate and a sense of fairness and empathy for one another, then what do? You can't really trust people to work together, for the common good, that is democracy. No, and so you can't trust government, and you must depend on something automatic that we can't muck up, right? The free market. So wealth then concentrates. We often hear that we are, our inequality is more extreme than Western Europe. It is actually more extreme than 117 countries in the world today. So we get this unthinkable concentration of wealth that then what happens? The actual experience of scarcity increases. The actual experience of scarcity, reinforcing this idea that, see, we are these selfish little shoppers and we can't really do democracy. This is what I call the spiral of powerlessness. And so it does bring on this distrust of neighbor, distrust of government, and it is self-reinforcing. And the consequences of these two worldviews, remember I started out with the worldview from the 40s to the 70s, and then from the 74 to 2004, and of course it got only worse after that. So I just think that this is one of the most telling graphs I've ever seen, that this was my generation, that's my children's generation. But look at this. Everyone, this is real family income, by the way, real family income, and everyone pretty much doubled their real family income. And guess who did the best? The poorest among us did the best. And look what happened in the second period. Only those at the highest, at the highest quintile, the richest quintile, the far right, really cleaned up. So these worldviews, I'm claiming, have very practical, real-world consequences. And so there we are. Now, so these consequences are so extreme then that where does all this take us? That I'm going to argue tonight that not only does this worldview end up then denying so many, the basic physical needs of homes and food and jobs that we need to thrive, but it also cannot meet our deepest emotional needs. I claim that we humans have all of us have three deep emotional needs that are unmet, that are violated by the dominant worldview that I've been describing. And here I describe them this way. The dominant story is failing because it denies our need for a sense of agency, power, a need for meaning beyond our own survival, and connection to each other in the earth. And for me, these needs, their fulfillment, they add up to human dignity. So the dominant worldview is denying human dignity. That is why it is failing us. That is what I'm laying out here, arguing, putting out for you tonight. So now let's turn to the news story. What is the news story that I feel is happening in this room tonight? and with so many people whose work gets me up in the morning, so to speak. What is the new story? What is the new story that we are creating in what I love to call, and Adam Eichen and I, we fought with our Beacon publisher to make sure we got capital D, capital M. We so believe it. It really deserves that designation, and they went along with us. They're so sweet. Okay, so this is the new story. The new story is that humans did not evolve. We couldn't have made it to 7 point whatever we are, 6, if we were whiners and couch potatoes. We are not. We are doers and problem solvers. I'm convinced of that. And that dignity is what we need above all in our doing in our community. And so with that then, this new story that is taking shape is actually then creating the very conditions that have proven over history to bring out the very best in us. And I lay out for you that I believe that this movement that I feel is growing, that I'm so proud to say that I'm part of, the democracy movement is co-creating then the 3 conditions that have proven to bring out the best. Because we know that under the wrong conditions, that not just a few of us, but most of us can commit unspeakable evil and just plain cruelty. And yet, in the right conditions, and I'm arguing the widest dispersion of power, transparency in human relationships. I love there to point out, for example, what happens without transparency is what happened in the financial meltdown. That the bankers who were slicing and dicing these derivatives and then passing them off as legitimate investments, you know what their slogan was? IBG, YBG, I'll be gone, you'll be gone. They knew they would be out of there, and they were, right? And my other favorite thing I love to tell people is UK professors who were not paying for their coffee at a coffee station, you know, a honor system. And so some psychology professor put a picture of human eyes above the coffee station, and the professor started paying. Hey, just a suggestion that somebody is watching us, we do better. So dispersion of power, transparency, and this is where it's so important in our culture today, the notion that if we're all connected, we're all implicated. So we can't just point fingers. If we do point fingers, it's got to come all the way in a circle. Because, for example, back to the financial meltdown, I wish some of those bankers had gone to jail. But I also know that, wait a minute, where was I when Bill Clinton was deregulating the financial industry? Where were we as responsible citizens? So in all of these things, yes, some people are guilty, but we're all responsible, right? And that is a premise then of real democracy for me. And so that is one aspect then of this norm of mutual accountability that is key to democracy, what I love to call living democracy, that which promotes life. And so what really gets me up in the morning, as I've said, is that the democracy movement, even if they don't use my language or this particular summation, I sense that it is motivated by the same kind of insight, that this is what is bringing these deep system reforms to fore today, now. And so I am proud to have marched from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. 3 years ago for democracy reforms. And guess who our champion was, who spoke to us at the Visitor Center the day after we arrived? It was none other than John Sarbanes, who now I'm going to be coming to in a minute, from Maryland, who has sponsored the For the People bill, this omnibus democracy reform bill. And so this rising democracy movement, then, what is it about? What is it about? Oh, I'm going to pause 1 second and just notice this little symbol on my sweater here. There's some back giveaway. One of the millennials in my office came up with this idea that every movement needs a symbol, and this is the D for democracy in American Sign Language. And it worked as I sat on the Capitol steps. Yes, one person, one vote. So if you like a sticker, think about a new symbol for our movement. There it is. They're back on the book table. So this bringing to life then of the democracy movement is what gets me up in the morning. Now, some people say, Frankie, you're so naive. This country is so polarized. You can't really expect people to go for democracy. Well, I won't read that. You can take it in. You know those numbers, right? There's so much more unity among us than the press who focuses on polarization. I want to erase that word. Would acknowledge. And so this kind of unity that you see in these numbers here make possible then some very real democracy advances. And this is a summary of some of those, and I want to call out a few in particular that these, the three categories are money out of politics, citizens in, and restoring and expanding voting rights, and ensuring every vote has equal weight. So I just want to call out a few things. Many of you know. How many of you know that Maine 2000 started clean elections so that you can run, if you get $5 from 50 people, you can run. That's how it started out with matching funds from, are you aware of that? Well, I got to tell you a story, quick story. Deb Simpson, she wasn't aware either. She was a waitress in Auburn, Maine. And her friend said, Deb, you're a natural leader. She had a high school education. You're a natural leader. Why don't you run for office? She said, what are you talking about? I don't have money. Deb, all you have to do is get $5 from 50 people. She said, oh, I'm a waitress. I can do that. And she did. And Deb Simpson then became one of the most stellar, beloved, and respected leaders. She was put ahead of serious committees and she was reelected 3 times. An amazing story of what can happen when people can come forward without need of big money. So certainly that. Also, democracy vouchers, $25. 4 $25 vouchers now go in city races in Seattle for every citizen. And those people, the citizens can can allocate these vouchers however they see fit. They call them democracy vouchers. And one of the most significant impacts has been more youth participation, but more participation in general. And so I want to call out also the speed of the automatic voter registration movement, because it started in Oregon in 2015, one state, and they saw this huge increase in registration, of course, with automatic voter registration, and also it played out in stronger voter turnout. And already now, that was just 2015, 15 states and the DC have adopted it. So that means if you interact at all with any public agency, you're automatically registered to vote. How many of you know about Florida? What happened in Florida in the midterms? Oh my gosh. This was my weeping night, because what passed was the 1.4 million people who had been convicted of a felony, had paid their time in prison, had been released, and still could not vote. 1.4 million people had their voting rights restored. I believe it's something like 20% of African American men. You can imagine the difference that's going to make for a whole country. And guess what? It passed with 64% of the vote. Yeah, that just happened. Yes, it's historic. And since you love that so much, let me just tell you that the man behind it, he himself had been imprisoned, had gotten out, got a law degree, and still could not vote. And he made this happen. I mean, with a lot of help from many, many, many people. So I wanted to call out that. Also, I want to talk about ranked choice voting. Many of you have heard of that now. They're called bills in Massachusetts. We could be ranked choice voting. Again, the Mainers are at the lead on this. You know what they did? They explained ranked choice voting by using their very popular pubs to have people come in and taste beer and then choose their favorite beer using ranked choice voting. So smart, these Mainers. And so they're the first state, but Massachusetts could be right on their heels with enough of our support. And also, I love this story in the midterms, that in Michigan, I've got to introduce you to somebody here, to Katie Fahey, right? She was so upset by gerrymandering in Michigan that she posted to Facebook about her anger and wanting to do something. And guess what happened? In a week, she got 50 people to volunteer to collect the signatures to put on the ballot a law that required the state to have an independent, nonpartisan districting commission. And they got 140,000 signatures in 180 days. It was way more than they needed, and it passed. And it passed in the midterm. So thank you, Katie. So these are some of the things that, yes, that get me out of bed in the morning. Now then, the other thing I wanted to, just a couple more of these uppers for me. One of them is the national popular vote. Do you know about that? How many of you don't know about the national popular vote? Okay, so I will, it's very, very briefly, it's a workaround. It's a way to deal with the Electoral College that, as we know, the last 5 elections, the candidate with the least popular vote won twice in the last 5 elections. So it's a workaround, but it's really a smart workaround. And so to make the popular vote be the determining vote, right? Our choice, the citizen choice. What the National Popular Vote is called Interstate Compact, National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says, is that you just get enough states with the votes equivalent to that which would be enough to elect the president to commit to voting for, allocating their votes to the winner of the popular vote. Duh. And already, let's see, 13 states have passed such a bill, and that takes us to 2/3 of the way to the electoral votes needed to enact national popular vote. So we need 9 more states, and in 9 more states, it's passed 1 chamber. So again, it's moving along. It's moving along. And also, I want to call out my hero, John Sarbanes, because his bill, I first became aware of it 3 years ago, and now it passed the House with 10 days ago, with a very, very solid majority in the House. And it really touches all the elements of that generally people within the democracy movement. It was a lot of careful honing. I didn't want to overload you with too many words, but it's easy to search and support then as it moves forward. As this is another reason why the 2020 election is so important, that this is there, and there is some bipartisan support. The other thing that I want to call us to is that back to the original slide of the 3 roots, I wanted to bring us around then to these 3 roots, as I said, and I haven't yet touched on the climate crisis, because I think many of us are getting it from many directions that we can't solve the democracy crisis without addressing the climate crisis, and vice versa. And there's no chicken and egg here. And so I just wanted to spend a moment and ooze about how excited I am about the Green New Deal. Because for many reasons, but I feel that the youthful energy coming into this is phenomenal, and that we elders can team up. I mean, this is one of the great joys of the democracy movement. They don't have an attitude about elders, like I think some of us did in the 60s, that it's arm in arm. I wrote a book with someone 49 years my junior, and we agreed on every word, and we're close buddies. So there's just this intergenerational energy that is so special right now for me, and the Green New Deal is certainly part of that. And so I just want to underscore how all of our democracy work can lock arms with the Green New Deal. These are some of the general goals of the Green New Deal, of which, of course, the president and others make fun of. How could that ever happen? So that ridiculing it is absurd to me, because I want to just show you here how incredibly, how signs of real possibility that really are impressive. For one, I saw this by accident, this graph, that without any real national leadership to speak of, we were already making some significant progress. And so that says to me, oh gosh, what would we do if we had real progress, right? I mean, excuse me, real leadership. So, and also what gives me this kind of eyes wide open hope is also recognizing, look, if Europe has already cut, its emissions are 1/2 to 1/3 of ours, then there's proof right there that we can do this. And jobs, already 3.2 million Americans have jobs in clean energy. That's 3 times more than fossil fuels. And I particularly love this, since I grew up in Texas, that if Texas were a country, it would rank number 6 in wind production in the world. And that's in a big oil state. And it happened in part because of small d democracy, which we could talk about, but I just got the sign that I've got to start winding down. So these are really, really, really important to share with others when we get told, oh, this is a pipe dream, this can't happen. No, it is happening. And another way that it is happening is at the state and at the local level. Let me just mention a few things that really excite me about the Green New Deal. Of course, the Sunrise Movement, they just started last fall. First 250 young people came in, I believe, November. By December, 1,000 young people hit the Congress, and many of you, I'm sure, saw that clip of Dianne Feinstein embarrassing every adult in the world by being obnoxious. My granddaughters watched that 5 times, I heard. And then that at the state level, I just pulled these out because they particularly struck me, again, to show what's possible here. In Illinois, it took 2 years of organizing, but just a month after Trump was elected, that Illinois passed what's called Solar for All, massive solar installation and job training, and it will create over 7,000 new jobs every year and reduce energy costs for millions of people living in Illinois. In New York, the New York Renews Coalition, it's 150 organizations that is backing climate and community action together, and I have a note here that a sizable majority of people have said they're willing to pay more for electricity if it is clean in New York. And in California, they've passed a no-nonsense, a year and a half ago, a bill that simply said the $10 billion or so that is spent on state infrastructure every year, they have to source from clean energy production processes, like for their steel or their glass. I mean, some very common sense kinds of legislation. They are creating this new story. And one of the other pieces of this that so excites me is that organizations like Sierra Club, I believe Sierra Club was one of the sponsors tonight. I'm a big fan. And they are also, as is Greenpeace, co-founders of the Democracy Initiative, this coalition of about 70 organizations representing 40 million people for democracy reform. So if you go to Sierra Club, you will read also about we got to do democracy to save our planet. And so it's not an either or. I love that. It's one of the most encouraging parts of it. And then all of this that I've been describing, what does it do? Instead of a spiral of powerlessness, it creates a positive reinforcing spiral of empowerment, because we start building our confidence in ourselves to come together collaborative and to create the conditions that bring out the best and keep the worst in check. And we can then remove the power of big money in politics. And then government can actually answer to citizens and create the rules of transparency and dispersion of power. And as living democracy evolves, then fear and blame recede. And people want to participate to fulfill their human needs for power, meaning, and connection. So I will now wrap up. I'll now close with the observation that in all of this, that's me and the march, that we can let go of the idea, and I don't feel it's in this room, but it's somewhere out there, that democracy is a dull duty. It is not. It is a thrilling, thrilling undertaking. And after we marched together, Adam took this photo of me. This is my co-author, 49 years my junior. We spent a lot of time talking about why were we so happy? Why were we so happy, smiling so much? And we realized that this thrill of democracy we experienced, and I'm sure many of you have, that through this good work, this essential foundational work of democracy, you meet people you would never have met otherwise, and realize, oh, you may have a jillion differences, but you agree on this, and it's so rewarding. So bonding with strangers. Then civil courage. What is that? That's just doing what you thought you could not do. And it's thrilling. I thought I might not be able to walk 10 miles, and I made it. And then Adam and I, at the end of our march, we were walking toward the Capitol. We were all chanting, "Whose democracy? Our democracy." And I saw the dome, and I started weeping. And I realized something shifted in me that has not unshifted. And that is that I said, oh my God, they work for me. We are the owners. I'm not an outsider pleading with them. It's our democracy, right? And so this, I don't know what to call it, but something like that moment when you get this sense of, it's not a dull duty, it's the joy of sense of power. It is ours. And so I believe then that in all of this, that perhaps that center thrill is so important to call out, because Adam and I end our book saying that in this extraordinary era that you and I share to be alive now, that the opposite of evil is no longer goodness. The opposite of evil is courage, because goodness without courage is just not good enough. And so we have to understand then, if courage is key, it is not fearlessness, but knowing that we can transform the energy of fear into power. And I have a little cheesy thing, I'll share with you a little trick, where not too many years ago, I was in a situation where I knew I had to speak up, and I would separate myself from all of my friends, and my heart was going pounding crazy. And usually in that situation, I say, Frankie, you wimp. But then I said, oh, Frankie, you're the reframer. You got to reframe that. So I call it now my inner applause. The pounding heart of fear is really our inner applause telling us to go for it. And so in that spirit then, I want to say the other amazing thing that I'm learning through the democracy movement, and just by virtue of being old, is that the great news is that courage is contagious. The great thing, one of the great things about our being social creatures, that we mimic each other, we take cues from each other. Somebody is always watching you, and you don't know who. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but the Women's Strike for Peace in the early 60s, they were marching around the Kennedy White House and feeling kind of silly and futile and like nobody, It was for a nuclear test ban treaty. And guess who drove by? Benjamin Spock. And he said, oh, if those people can take this so seriously, maybe I should look into this. And he became, of course, the leader, and then within 2 years, Kennedy had done it. Nuclear test ban treaty. So you never know who is watching. And so that is really that you can count on that somebody is seeing you engaged and finding meaning and power and connection. They say, ooh, I want some of that, right? So I take a lot of delight in that. And so as I'm going to ask you, I'm going to just close in one more paragraph, but if you're willing, if you've had the courage, I'd like you to turn to your neighbor and just chat just for 5 minutes about one thing you could do that might require your heart to pound a little bit. One thing you could do to take you out of your comfort zone for democracy. And then we'll come back and have a Q&A and share a little bit. So that's my challenge to you when I finish. But I'm just saying, my last thought for us is that in our long evolution, we have learned one thing about our species, that is not the magnitude of a challenge that crushes the human spirit. The only thing that really does us in is feeling useless and futile, that we have nothing to offer. And so I feel that more than usually in my life, that tonight in this room, I can say to you that I can ask you, okay, where's your power? And I firmly believe it is right here in this room right now. It is your vision, your already demonstrated determination with buddies all around you to push you, to stretch you, and also to catch you when you need to be caught. And that that is your power. I ask you to embrace it, to glory in it, and to believe that we humans were made for this moment. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, let's give it up one more time for Frankie. That was pretty inspirational, I'd say. So I apologize. Our 5-minute chat, I think we're going to leave until the end. I hope that's okay with you, Frankie. Don't get mad at me. Okay.
That's okay. You're in charge.
So what we want to do is kick off the Q&A session right now. We're going to have about 30 minutes for questions from the audience and answers from our guest right here. If you guys are interested in asking Frankie a question, feel free to line up behind the microphone right in the middle aisle here. Robin, who's waving her hand, is there to assist you if needed. We respectfully ask that you keep your questions, number one, to actually questions, not necessarily a speech or a diatribe of sorts.
By the way, if you want to give me a speech, I'm really easy to find. Our office is right across from the Kennedy School. You can come and give me your speech. I'd love to hear your speech.
There you go. And actually, on that note, Frankie has been gracious enough with her time to give us about 30 minutes after our Q&A session to answer questions, converse with everyone, and also sign books if you're so interested. And that will be happening right in the back. So without further ado, let's kick it off. Anybody have a question for Frankie? Come on up.
I do. Thank you for your wonderful speech, and I feel empowered and feel like our United States can deal with this. But how about the world? I mean, what evidence is there that there's this kind of movement anywhere else in the world? Because to save the planet, the whole world needs to get involved. Mm-hmm.
Well, should I repeat the question?
Yes.
Concerned that we may have a democracy movement rising here, but I'm going to go a little bit further than what you said, but assuming that you see authoritarianism rising elsewhere and the climate crisis even more severe, affecting people around the world. And I can't answer that except to say that, back to my premise, that we're all connected and things are changing moment to moment, and we know that our negative modeling is affecting the world. Yeah. We know that for certain. And we also know that some really interesting things are happening from villages in India, where the whole southern midsection states of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh are moving toward agroecology, which is a great climate benefit, that Niger has reforested through agroforestry a huge swath of the country because of peasant initiative. Nobody ever hears about that. Again, a great thing for the world's climate as well as for the farmers. We do know that Europe is way ahead of us on action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So yes, there are setbacks, but I also follow the work of the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance in Sweden, and they say that actually in terms of dealing with corruption, that there's been more advance on countries in the world that keep very careful data and reporting than setbacks on the corruption front. So it's very mixed, but we do know for certain that people are watching us and so discouraged by the fact that we allowed this storyline to develop to the point that people felt so disrespected that they would vote for Donald Trump. And so we know we're having a negative impact, so why can't we also believe that as we take action and reverse this negative trend, that we can have a positive effect? So I really strongly believe that we have a tremendous, courageous, contagious effect in the world.
Your answer makes me smile.
Oh, good. Yes, please, another tough one.
I think your presence makes us smile. It's such a perfect antidote to turning on the news. So your book, Diet for a Small Planet, was so groundbreaking, such a revelation. And I always struggle, I consider myself an activist, environmentalist, and I don't know if you have a theory or just some encouragement to keep bringing those messages about how, we can use the tools of our knives and our forks and our plates and our diet into educating people. I mean, I know the UN has, and, Earth Save, but, it always seems to me left out. How the environmental degradation is so directly related to, our diet. And I know the, agribusiness is so enormous, animal agriculture, but just bringing that into the environmental movement, it seems like the inconvenient truth that just gets left out, and yet it's so.
Yes.
Well, we all know, what we don't all know, that's the thing. It just seems peripheral, marginalized.
Yes, yes. I know a lot of people, including me, a lot of us were very distressed that the agricultural piece was not included in the original Green New Deal vision, but my hope and what is that this is just the beginning, and there's so much knowledge now about both the negative contribution of agriculture and particularly livestock to climate change, and the opposite is equally true, that the forestry, for example, is incredibly powerful. I wrote a book called World Hunger 10 Myths in 2015, and one of the statistics that I remember from that book was that a scientist in Europe had concluded that if the EU converted to agriculture using agroforestry techniques, that alone would sequester 37% of all EU greenhouse gas emissions. So to me, of course, as the author of Diet for a Small Planet, it's a win-win-win-win-win, because now we know this is so much healthier for our bodies as for the earth. So I think it's really, again, modeling that excitement of, I think of eating with the earth. I call my diet now a plant and planet-centered diet, and don't use the term vegetarian, although I am for 48 years. Also, I just learned that the company that published Diet for a Small Planet is going to publish a 50th anniversary edition. So that's cool. Thank you. So I think anyway, just encourage us to bring that in, because it's so positive. It's got.
I will use that inner applause.
Yeah, great. And this is one of the things. It's not about sacrifice. I've always said that exploring the world of plant food was always just has been, always will be. That's where all the variety, right, is, and texture, taste, color, everything. And so it's embrace of this richer diet, not sacrifice. Like what did they say that we're going to take their hamburgers away, right? Okay. Yes.
Do you know of anything happening like the Koch brothers in terms of funding on, I use the word our side because we've moved beyond politics to the side of the recognition of everything is connected, and the fact that massive capital is needed to influence the media. You're preaching to the choir here. We're talking about everybody out there doesn't seem to be aware of the incredible, incredible danger we're in from climate change. And so I'm wondering if there's that kind of accumulation of monies that are coming in from large people that are aware. If you ever read the book Dark Money by Kevin Phillips, you see how insidious this Koch brothers money is. It's not just
Jane Mayer's
campaigns,
book,
it's
Dark
setting up.
Money?
Pardon?
Jane Mayer, right?
Pardon?
Jane Mayer, Dark Money.
I had a different offer.
Okay.
But they're pointing out the
we couldn't
fact
have
that they
written our book
stopped
during
funding.
Democracy Without Change.
They started creating these innocuous-sounding think tanks, but for the purpose of educating people who might be judges and so on and so forth. In the capitalist prevails. No good perspectives think tanks, and so they're influencing thought underneath the covers. And I wish that was happening on our side.
Yes. I know that the level of wealth, I have to say, from what I've studied of it, it's one of the ironies, the sad ironies, is that this dominant worldview of that the free market is the solver of everything, that the Koch brothers have managed to really, really coordinate that funding. They have these I believe they're annual confabs where they bring people together. It's all very secretive, and it's very much directed. They all get on the same page. But the democracy funders, they like to do it more democratically. And so they let people choose, who they would want to fund. And so that's one of the challenges of democratic philosophy, is that we're not as focused. On the other hand, I am aware, and I just want to mention a couple things. One that I'm very directly involved in, and it is the creation, which I would love it if you would write this down and put it on your calendar for 6 weeks from now or so. But we are launching a hub for the movement right here from Harvard Square. The website is going to be, the URL is democracymovement.us, democracymovement.us. And it's not going to be fancy dancy whistles and bells, but it will introduce you, keep you abreast and be a source of news of these kinds of victories, and as a map that you can scroll over, and find out what's going on in your own neck of the woods. And so that is some level of visibility that hasn't been there, and just celebrating that you have. I'm hoping that people are going, and I'm hoping that professors will put their students onto this, because we're going to have a timeline of the democracy movement that goes over 100, a long time, so that we can say your students can learn the history of democracy too. So I think that's part. A friend of mine named Eleanor LeCain, you can look at her article in American Prospect about 2 months ago, and she's writing the call for an organized democracy hub, not an online thing like we're doing that, but an actual physical where we put our heads together and we coordinate more. So I know that's happening. There may be a democracy center opening. I can't mention the place yet, but at a very noted university, happening soon because of a major donor company stepping up for exactly that. And it would have a public think tank piece, and it would have an organizing piece. So there are some things happening in that arena, but I agree with you, it's not nearly as much money and not nearly as orchestrated. But we've also got a lot going for us, which is reality. So.
I wonder if you're familiar with the 4-page newsletter. Comes out monthly by Jim Hightower. It's called the Hightower Lowdown. Should I say something
Jim
about
Hightower and I are both from Texas, so I know Jim, and I'm a big fan.
Well, maybe you could say something about his newsletter, because
Go for it.
in the 1950s, I.F. Stone was a voice in the wilderness, publishing a 4-page newsletter fighting McCarthyism. And these days, Jim Hightower, who was the former Texas Agriculture Commissioner, publishes a very similar type of newsletter in which he lists lots of positive things that are happening that people are unaware of, that showing the success of populist groups around the country.
I'm so glad you mentioned Jim Hightower, and I used to always read his newsletter. I haven't in a while, and so now I'm going to make it tonight. I'm going to sign up again because he is definitely one of my heroes of heroes. In his book back in the early 70s, it was called Hard Tomatoes, Hard Times. And that was, he started the Agribusiness Accountability Project, which had a huge impact on my work in founding Food First at that time. So thank you for telling us all about Jim.
I just want to say, first of all, thanks so much for being here. It's a very inspiring talk, and I think I notice everyone in here, for the most part, is like at least 5 years older than me. So I think for people my age, I think we sort of like appreciate that narrative a lot. One thing I felt maybe we didn't touch on a ton, though you mentioned it, is organized civil disobedience.
Yes, thank you.
And I think, like, especially at the end of your talk, you were talking about courage, and like, there's tons of people who I think agree with all of us, and they sort of just need to see courage, right? And I think like a way to do that is civil disobedience. So maybe a plug for one group I'm part of is Extinction Rebellion in the neighborhood, but there's tons of others. So
Yes, no, thank you for that. And Democracy Spring, that would really change my life. I can't underscore that enough. It was the 2016 march from Philadelphia, and we sat in on the Capitol steps, and I think people said it was the largest sit-in on the Capitol steps that anyone could remember. And 1,300 of us got arrested. And so it was such a beautiful experience. There was a young woman dressed as a Statue of Liberty. And I have a picture of her being handcuffed. So there was a lot of thought put into this, and total dignity. And it was, so I know that Democracy Spring has continued on, and there are many, I think, appropriate and powerful ways to use civil disobedience. So I thank you for mentioning that, and I should have brought that out about what Democracy Spring was really about. I didn't tell you what happened after I started crying when I saw the Capitol steps. I sat on them.
Frankie, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Oh, this is, well, it's on again. So actually inspired by our friend who just asked a question, and he stole my joke that, there are a lot of people with, hair a little bit lighter than mine in the room, but I feel like an old person after hearing him speak. Anyways, I'm curious, a lot of us obviously are from, a slightly older generation. What are your thoughts or suggestions on getting millennials and even younger generations involved in the democracy movement?
Well, I just couldn't be more excited than I am about the Sunrise Movement. And so the more that we can offer offer visibility, like on our new website, democracymovement.us, I want to highlight the Sunrise Movement for sure there, and just encourage. I know that Dick was telling me, you were so surprised that only CNN covered that children's strike. So, that was a huge international thing. So that the more that we can encourage these young people and help in any way possible, and I'm hoping again that our democracy website can highlight that, and tell and share stories of possibility, the kinds of things that, so that they can see that progress is being made at state, local, city levels, and that they're not alone, and that they are being heard. And I thought that can counter with Dianne Feinstein, where the children were so impressive. I think that touched so many hearts. You know what I'm talking about, right? If you don't, check it out. It was quite impressive, and so. I don't have a simple answer to that, but I think that just anything I can do to promote the Sunrise Movement, I'm going to try to do.
Any other questions?
16-year-olds?
Oh, 16-year-old to vote. Yeah, I think that's another thing that I I had on my screen here that I feel pretty strongly about. I was really convinced by Adam, my colleague, that it's when young people are in high school and they still have a community, when they know where to vote, and they're still not caught up in leaving home and all the stuff that's going on the first year of college. And actually at Vassar, where Adam went, they gerrymandered Vassar. So if you lived in one dorm, you voted one place in another. I mean, made it as hard as possible. So anyway, he feels very strongly, and there's a new book coming out, and we're going to do a book event for it called Vote for Us. And the first stories in it are about young people in San Francisco and Berkeley and in Maryland, 2 cities in Maryland, that young people have come forward, and that first the adults were really opposed, and then when the young people made the case, they changed their minds. And Adam's theory, and it seems so right to me, that if you get started with that habit of voting when you're in high school, and also you get the practice, because I think young people nobody likes to look silly, but if you've never done anything and you go to a polling booth, you're not sure if you're going to reveal that you don't know what you're doing. So if you have that experience in high school where you get a practice ballot and you can have debates, and I just feel it just makes so much sense to integrate into our lacking civics classes. And but I just think that's a really important change that is happening at some. And I didn't realize it could happen jurisdiction by jurisdiction somehow, but it can. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I want to really comment on how far we've headed on the anti-civil Citizens United movement. Seems like I've signed a number of petitions, and I haven't heard of anything concrete in terms of where we've gone.
Well, I mean, I think I speak for Adam and me, and is that our premise is that to pass a constitutional amendment requires not only Congress to pass it by 2/3, but states, 3/4 of states have to pass it. So all the democracy reforms that you're involved in, that I was talking about tonight, those are all what are leading to a country that would be able to conceivably have 3/4 of the states pass an amendment. So we don't see it as, we see it as a pathway, because clearly that this notion of money as speech, this conflation of money and speech, is I'll just say, I wrote a piece called "Did the Supreme Court Ignore Its Strongest Argument?" If you can remember that, to Google it. Anyway, if you don't, you can ask me. But I was so excited because I found in the original argument, Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, that is when this premise of any limitation on speech, any limitation on money is a limitation of free speech. Actually, in Buckley versus Vallejo is the most beautiful rationale for why the opposite is true. And so we know that the Supreme Court itself has articulated the arguments for why there is a public purpose to the First Amendment, and the goal of democracy is a conversation of democracy. And if somebody can afford, a few people can afford these massive megaphones that blare, 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 and the rest of us are essentially silenced, we can't be heard, that's not democracy. So I think that even in this, I just want to say that even in the Supreme Court's own arguments that are on the record, has been a powerful case against this idea of money as speech. So, but I think the work that is outlined in my talk, and that many of you are involved in, that is laying the basis for that worldview that could actually pass an amendment that would basically would end that logic of Citizens United.
Thank you. This movement is big. Could you say a few words to remind us of just how much fantastic leadership there is from people of color as well?
Thank you. if you look at the democracy movement among the founders, of course, of this organization that embodies this movement of movements is the NAACP. They were one of the first, and of course the labor movement, which has a large representation of people of color. And so I feel like people of color, of course, are those most hurt by the environmental crisis and most damaged by voter suppression, which has been so rampant, as Adam and I described in Daring Democracy, and also have been then some of the most important leaders. And I think, to me, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I just, it's such a powerful statement that a young woman could come from her background and be so inspiring to such a broad swath of people. And that is a breakthrough that we can't underestimate. So I think, the leaders now of Democracy Spring is one young black man, a dear friend of mine, Ronaldo Pearson, and his co-leader is Tanya, and I'm blanking on her last name, from an Hispanic background. And so they then took over from two white guys and have been the leaders of Democracy Spring. So I think that both the intergenerational and the intercultural, the interethnic, interracial, every piece of that is so important to attend to, and I hope that that we can call ourselves to it and call each other out to do better, as you asked me tonight, and because to me that is our greatest strength, because clearly in our fight for addressing climate change, absolutely my heart breaks for the people who are so suffering in communities where there's no clean water, there's no clean air, and if this is couched in a way that we are building cleaner energy and infrastructure it's a human rights question as well as an environmental question. I just learned that there are almost 4,000 communities in America in which the water, that lead poisoning is worse than it was in Flint, in the beginning of Flint. Wow. Yeah. And who's talking about this? And who's being affected? People of color. So, I just feel that things are breaking open, like when my first slide with the big storm and these, a lot is getting exposed. And it is, and thank you for the question. Thank you.
Great. No more questions? Perfect timing. Everyone must have known when the cutoff time was. So let's give our fabulous speaker one more round of applause. And once again, I just want to very quickly remind everyone that Frankie has graciously agreed to stay with us for about a half an hour to sign books and answer questions and speak with everyone. I want to thank the Arlington Democratic Town Committee one more time, the UU Church, and all the other organizations and individuals who helped us put on this fantastic night. We had about 170 people here, which is, I can't believe 170 people fit in this room. Wow. Amazing. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.